Can you describe to me your work environment?
Sure. So I'm a social worker and I work at an agency called Prevail, and we work with victims of crime and abuse. And so I work in an office-based setting and basically do all of my work there. So we don't do any community-based services at this time for our clients. So I have an individual office that has a door for privacy reasons, and I work with clients in a variety of settings there.
Okay. Can you describe the day-to-day operations, what you do?
Sure. My job there, I'm the adult advocacy supervisor, so I'm one of the bosses, and so I am responsible for all of our adult services. So that includes domestic violence, sexual assault programming, our victim notification services, protective orders, and secondary victims. So I manage all of those programs and the staff that work in those, and self-sufficiency as well. And then I'm also a working supervisor, so I carry a caseload. I see clients on a day-to-day basis, and I specialize in working with secondary victims. So day-to-day would be I might have some client interaction, so meeting with clients one-on-one, and that's typically for an hour at a time. I might have meetings with my staff or other management, as well as potentially facilitating a group.
Why did you pick this profession?
I picked social work because of the flexibility with the degree. I didn't know at the time when I went to school exactly what I wanted to do because so much interested me about the profession, and then victim services kind of found me. So I started my journey at Prevail as an intern. So very early on in my education, actually through my associate's degree at Ivy Tech, and I really just fell in love with the population and the work, and have stayed there ever since. So not that I know that I'll live and die at Prevail, but I do think that I do think that that's something that I really enjoy, and I found that I'm naturally really good at. But social work as a profession, I feel like with that degree, I can do anything that I ever want to do with it. Even if I decide to one day do something else.
That's the same with me. I don't know what I want to do. It's just there's a lot of options.
Yeah.
What would be like the main goal of your job? What is your main purpose?
With my job, it is to serve victims of crime and abuse. So our agency is unique in that. Hey, Stefan. Our agency is unique in that we don't just serve like domestic violence victims. A lot of times you see agencies that work with victims, but it's really specific and concentrated to a very small portion. Like victim assistance is typically attached to law enforcement or a prosecutor's office. There's not a lot of just like community-based organizations like Prevail. And so the goal is really to serve anybody who identifies themselves as a victim of crime or any type of abuse. We can provide services to them. So our agency is really unique in that way. And all of our services are free, which is amazing, which is another thing that I love about where I work.
What would be the most difficult part of your job?
It is difficult to hear the worst of the worst. I walk alongside people whose lives have been forever changed by trauma, and that's hard. It is definitely, there is some secondary trauma that happens there, because you can't be in that moment with that client walking along and not be affected. So I think that that's probably the hardest part, is just being able to maintain that, that my worldview has changed since I started there, but that's okay, and being able to really be able to separate what work is and what my life is. And sometimes that's hard.
Yeah. So you work with adults. Does it vary, like, ethnically or?
Yeah, so I work in Hamilton County, which is the wealthiest county in the state of Indiana. So I would say that primarily our population is Caucasian. Not all. We do see various ethnic backgrounds, various races, and different cultural aspects to victimization and trauma, for sure.
Yeah, in our class we talk a lot about cultural differences. Can you, is it very easy to see the differences?
So I think as a professional, we always have to educate ourselves. So if I am meeting with somebody who is from a different country or even a different part of the United States even, or just comes from a different background, I think that we always have to be aware of what those differences could be because, domestic violence or sexual assault or any sort of victimization. I mean, trauma is trauma, but the way that the delivery of that is sometimes different, and cultural norms. Like for instance, in the Hispanic culture in Mexico, it is common practice to beat your wife, and that's accepted. And but in the United States, not so much. So, being aware of how culturally that's viewed and why victims may not want to speak out and get services because they have been programmed that this is okay and this is acceptable. I mean, that happens in the middle of the street. It's not even behind closed doors down there. So definitely have to be aware, but I do a lot of research, right? So really keeping myself apprised of what those cultural differences might be and how I can best interact with my client.
I'm in another class I'm in is about poverty. Does poverty play a big role?
Plays a huge role in the work that I do. So I just mentioned that I work in the wealthiest county in the state of Indiana. However, the majority of our clients have access to less than $5,000 a year in income. So, and because I work in a wealthy county, it's often not seen as big of an issue as it truly is for victims because, it's viewed that there are enough resources and there are not. When you talk about low-income housing, it is almost non-existent. When you talk about financial assistance, that's almost non-existent, So poverty plays a huge role. And one of the main reasons why somebody stays or goes back to an abusive relationship is money. So poverty plays a huge role in the services that we provide. Yeah.
One of the things we talked about in our Spanish class is the lack of translators and the language barrier. Do you have translators within your organization?
So we don't have any within our organization, but we do contract with a service that provides translation services. So if we have somebody that has a language barrier, then we contact the translation service, set it up for them to come in and be present with the client during an intake or during an appointment. We've even had translators come in during groups. Yeah.
Okay. Would be the biggest obstacles that you face when trying to help the clients?
Resources and time, which time is considered a resource too, I guess. But resources are limited. So I just mentioned the financial resources that are really limited. That's a huge barrier. So just trying to get clients connected to everything that they need is difficult because we rely a lot on those community supports. But when there's very little funding for that, a client might have to go 10 different places in order to get their needs met, and that's a huge barrier. So resources and then funding is always difficult because funding is very specific. So because we're a nonprofit, so about half of our overall budget comes from grants. So that's either federal, state, or local, and so that's we have about $1 million budget for our agency, and so about half of that is grant funded. So, but the grants are very specific. So you can only spend X amount of dollars on this or X amount of dollars on that, and it doesn't cover the cost of a lot of the day-to-day operations that an agency needs to run. And so, you have to learn to do a lot with a little, and so that's definitely an obstacle.
What would you recommend to future college graduates who want to go into social work?
Well, I would recommend if you have to do any kind of practicum or internship to definitely think of something that you might be interested in doing and try that, and then think of something that you don't think that you want to do and try that too. I think that that's really helpful to get some real life, like practical experience to really figure out, where you want to go versus, job hopping till you figure it out, And then I would also say find a good therapist, because every good social worker has a good therapist.
Yeah.
And that's important because we have to be able to unpack and unload the things that we hear and the things that we have to deal with in order to be good social workers and to be able to do this work long term. That's probably my two biggest suggestions.
And then last question, what's the best part of your job? What's your favorite?
Oh, a lot. I love the clients that I work with. So, I mentioned that it's really hard to walk alongside people, but when you know that you have been a catalyst in somebody's life to help to change your life for the better, it is an amazing feeling. So the job is difficult, but very, very rewarding. So, and to have clients come back later and say and give you success stories like my life is different because you helped me. It's just, and they have done a lot of the work. I've just, like I said, just been a catalyst in their life, but it's very, very rewarding. And then social work is not just my job, it's who I am. So it really speaks to my values and my ethics and, just everything about who I am. So when I go to work, it doesn't feel like I'm going to work, because I really like my job, and I'm really, most days excited to go to work and to just see the change and just to be able to provide hope to people, because hope is a very powerful thing, hope that things can be different and their lives can change. So I'd say those are my most favorite parts of my job, is that it is very, very rewarding.
That's it.